today we're going to be making sourdough bread, and so the recipe that I'm going to do today is to make 2 loaves of bread that are about 950 grams each. Okay, so this is a recipe that I've been using for a while. I've looked at a few. Do your own research, try to find out what suits you and what's easier for you to make your own sourdough bread. So basically what it involves is we've got our culture, and I'll talk a little bit about the culture. So this culture, my son named Tarek, okay, so name your culture when you do. Cultures are basically a mixture of different types of bacteria, different types of yeast in your natural environment, atmosphere where you are. To make a culture, there's 3 ways we can actually get a culture. We can first acquire it from someone, so you can get it from me, or you can get it from a shop online, or someone else who might be comfortable enough and happy enough to share some with you. I'm in the process of drying some culture, so if you'd like some culture, I can give you some of the dried culture where the spores and the bacteria go into hibernation because of the dry atmosphere, and then you can just rehydrate it for yourself. Or you can get it from me, as I mentioned. Or the third way is you can make your own, and by making your own, it takes about a week for you to make your own culture. And what it is basically, as I mentioned, it is a mixture of all the bacteria and yeast in your environment that in the past what they did was they just left and continued to use their own dough and then propagate that dough to be used to ferment their bread and their wheat in order to make bread. So the way that you would do it is, if you're starting off from scratch, you would get a mixture of 50-50 water, 50-50 flour, any flour that you plan to use for whatever type of bread you need to make. I use a certain type of bread flour, which has a slightly higher protein content to help with the gluten and the elasticity. So you'd get a 50-50 part water flour mixture, and you just mix it together and leave it in a container and just leave it open. And you would allow that to collect and gather all the bacteria and yeast in the atmosphere. And over time, that would just start to ferment, and initially, I've never done it, but I heard that it has a very off smell. And you would replace this mixture by every single day taking about 80% of that mixture, discarding that mixture, and with the remaining 20%, add another, say, 50 mils of water plus 50 grams of flour, mix that up again, and use that mixture to then wait another day to allow that to ferment, and do the same thing the next day, and continually do that until by the end of the week, by doing that process of discarding 80% of the culture and adding another mixture of 50-50, you'll eventually have a culture starter that has a nice balance of the proper bacteria and proper yeast that would give you that nice fermentation and that nice soury smell. And that soury smell that you smell is the fermentation byproduct of acetic acid and lactic acid. So, and that's what we got here. If you have a look at this, I took this out of the fridge this morning and I fed it with that 50-50 mixture of flour and water, and I allowed it to rise over about 4 hours. Depending on the temperature, it varies based upon the temperature of the day. So what I do is when I make my mixture, I actually put a marker, and this is what the marker was at in the morning, and I've allowed it to rise. And you want to use it at its, they say the best time to use the mixture, the culture, is when it's at its peak, preferably when it has tripled in size. This is actually more than doubled, so the triple mark is probably, well, yeah, we're probably at the triple mark, and so this is a good time for us to use the culture for our sourdough. And if you have a look at it, I don't know if you can focus closely to it, but you see that it has a lot of bubbles in the mixture, and if you turn it to the side, or from the top, sorry, you can see a lot of the bubbles there, and it has a bit of a sticky texture to it as well. So that tells us that it's a nice culture to use for making the sourdough bread. And so the proportions that we're going to do to make 2 loaves will be, so you get a pair of scales to measure it out, and you would roughly use approximately 150 grams of your starter culture. So 150 grams. 150 grams of our starter culture, and the type of percentage hydration that we're using for this particular sourdough is 75%. This having a lower hydration, so less water for your dough, means that the dough is a little bit drier, obviously, but it allows the dough to be more easily handled. If you're finding that at 75% it's very sticky, very hard to handle, you might want to drop down your hydration a little bit. But the higher hydration, up to about 80%, you actually get a better crumb to the sourdough. So I like this 75% hydration dough that I'm using today, and I'm showing you today. And this is the best outcome I get for the ratio of manageability of the dough as well as the crumb. So 750 mils of water. We just add that in, and we give it a mix to disperse the culture. So just mix it up there, just to disperse the bacteria and yeast amongst itself with the water. And once it's done that, then we add the flour. So this is 1 kilogram of flour. So it's a 75% hydration dough, so 750 mils of water, 1 kilo of flour. So I'm just going to add that in, 1 kilo of flour, and remember this is making 2 loaves. And you just mix it until it's nice and homogeneous. So it actually gets quite sticky with a spoon, so eventually you want to start using your hands. And as I mentioned, unlike other typical doughs that we see with using yeast, this is more hydrated, so it's more stickier, and we're not actually kneading it, because it's actually very difficult because of the high hydration to actually knead it. So mix it as much as we can to get it homogeneous. And just acknowledging Jin is the camera person for today, who will be editing the videos as well, because I can't be bothered doing it. So mixing it. With the spoon it gets a little bit difficult, so I move over to using a dough scraper, which is this flexible plastic device. And I just basically scrape the sides so it's not being wasted, and fold it into the middle and push. Keep doing that until it's somewhat homogeneous, and then we get to doing the hard work with our hands after that. So when it's nearly homogeneous, we move over to our hands, and a little trick so it doesn't get all stuck on your hands is actually to wet your hands. And we just work it, and you can see that the dough is very sticky, so it's very moist, and I just basically try to get rid of all the lumps by squeezing it and rolling it and squeezing it, just to make it all nice and homogeneous, so there's no lumps, there's no wet patches that are inconsistent with the rest of the dough. Okay, so when you're happy that it's nice and homogeneous, you just get the dough scraper and scrape the rest of the dough off your fingers, and it's a bit of a lumpy, well, not lumpy, just mushy mess basically. We're going to leave this alone. In the meantime, we're going to weigh out 20 grams of salt, just any salt, just for the flavor. We're not adding the salt yet because we're going to allow the gluten strands to basically, because we've mixed everything together, all the gluten strands are kind of all over the place, and we want it to let it rest. Let it relax, the gluten strands, let it rest for about 15 minutes. I'm going to cover it with cling wrap, and leave it alone for 15 minutes just to rest, and then we're going to work by stretching it and folding it. We're not, with sourdough, we don't have to do a whole heavy kneading process, but we're just going to be stretching it and folding it, and that's how we actually develop the texture of the dough. So 15 minutes resting, covered with Glad wrap, and then we'll work it next. Okay, so the next step, after we've let it have about 15-20 minutes of rest, we're going to add the salt now. So it's a little bit smoother now, so the gluten strands have kind of organized itself a little bit more. So 20 grams of salt. Just going to add a bit to the top, and again, to make it less sticky, we put our hands in water, okay? So we just incorporate that. See how smooth now the dough is now? So we don't really need to do much kneading involved in this. So just incorporate the salt semi-evenly if you can. And then when all the salt has been put in, you work it. And you want to do quite vigorous working because you want to incorporate the salt as much as possible into the dough. Now, a word about the dough I didn't actually mention. So I'm using 100% white flour, but if you can do any sort of flour you want. Whatever type of sourdough bread you make, whether it's a mixture of rye, wholemeal, white, or whatever, spelt, you want the culture to have the same type of components in it. So if you're mainly doing a wholemeal type of breads, you want to have your starter fed with your wholemeal mixture, white flour mixture, or if you do rye, you do a rye mixture as well, and that will change the flavor. But generally, wholemeal type of flours generally will give you more of an acidic, kind of soury, typical classical sourdough taste. Okay, so if you're using more sourdough wholemeal mixtures, it will be a little bit more sour because the bacteria seem to like to ferment it a little bit more. Okay, so incorporate it well so you don't get any spots of just salt. Okay, so we come to the time for our stretch and fold. So with a wet hand, just so it doesn't stick, we just roll the rim and grab a bit, so and see how stretchy it is now, and then fold it in. And stretch and fold. Stretch and fold. Stretch and fold. And then put the Glad wrap back on and then leave it for another 30 to 45 minutes. And again, we keep doing this until the dough has doubled in size, or about 4 hours. Okay, so after our final stretch and fold, we're going to now shape the dough. So we're going to get some flour and put it on our bench. Just flour the bench a bit. Okay. Put some on our dough. And then with our scraper, just scrape it down into the pile. Now remember, we're making 2 loaves, so you can be liberal with your flour. And we're just going to cut it down the middle to make 2 separate loaves. Okay. And so with each one, we're just going to stretch it and fold it. Fold it, okay, and just roll it over, and then we're going to shape it. So this is going to be the surface of our dough. So in a way, we kind of let it grip a bit of the bench, and we're going to roll it to make it have more tension on the surface, and this is going to give us a nice crumb. Okay, so bring it to the middle, get some space, and just grab the sides and just roll it. And roll it so that you build tension on the surface, and it should look like it's getting more smooth on the surface, and you can see all the air bubbles as well from the fermentation process as well. Okay, so have a nice round ball and then cover it, and likewise we do the same with our other ones. So just stretch and fold, roll it over, and just build the tension, build the tension. You can just roll it around. Okay, and then we cover it. And we cover it for 30 minutes, and we'll come back to it. Okay, so now after the 30 minutes of, normally shouldn't stick. Okay, we're doing our final folding, okay, in preparation for it to go into the, for final shaping before cold fermentation. So what we do is if you have a proper banneton, that's probably the best thing. During COVID lockdown, I wanted to get it, but they were all sold out because everyone was baking. But I just use basically a tea towel, and I line the tea towel with a liberal amount of flour to prevent it from sticking. Okay, and then I take my dough, give it a bit of a dusting, as well as the area that I'm going to work on. Now remember, this is the surface of our loaf, so I'm going to pick it up and stretch it and roll it over. Then I'm going to fold it in and fold over, fold over, fold over, fold over. Keep folding it over. And remember, this is the surface, the underside. Then I'm going to roll it over until again I'm tightening up my my loaf. Okay, so again, same thing, rolling it to tighten it up, rolling it and to tighten it up. And again, we see more of the air bubbles happening. For the big ones, you can just pop them. Okay, and that's my final shaped dough. Then I'm going to just lift it up, and this is the surface that is the top of my loaf. So again, it's going to go face down because the bowl is going to give it its final shape. Okay, give it a dust so the towel doesn't stick, and then I'm going to fold over the towel. And if you have a proper banneton, it's a little bit easier because it's just all shaped in it. Then I'm going to put this in the fridge, and I'm going to leave that overnight. It's going to cold ferment, and the cold fermentation process enables it to develop a more firmer crust. Like when you'll see when it makes it a lot easier for us to score when we're ready to put it in the oven. So leave it in the fridge for 8 hours or however long it is that's more convenient for you. Then we can take it out and then do the final bake. So that's it. I'll put this in a plastic bag so it doesn't dry out. And then we're throwing it in the fridge. And then we'll see the videos about how to bake it after that. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have completed our cold fermentation process now. So we've taken it out of the fridge now. I had preheated the oven at 250 degrees Celsius, or if you're American, 482 Fahrenheit. So we'll take the bread out. Okay, so with the cold fermentation process, it's given itself a nice crumb there. And we're just going to get the bread out. We'll see how this goes. Okay. Now the cold fermentation process has enabled the surface of the loaf to be nicely shaped. And we can do a few things. If you want, you can add some nuts on the surface if you want. So if you want to just spritz it a bit with water and then get something like sesame seeds if you want, just to give it some extra flavor. And then you want to get yourself a nice, very sharp knife or razor, and you want to score it. And by scoring it, enables the exit point. You're guiding the exit point for the gases to come, because if you leave it as is, because of the outer surface of it, it will find the weakest spot and just split and pop based upon the weakest point. But we're guiding the weakest point by enabling the gas to escape to a certain area, and that's why we score it. So I just do you do whatever you want. I normally just cut something like that, just to enable the gas to exit from that point. And you can do some decorations if you want. You can make it look like there's little wheat petals or something. But that'll be it. Okay, and then you want to get yourself something like this, which is a little crock pot. And by having something that's oven safe with a lid on, it enables the trapping of the gases, the humidity, sorry. If you've got an oven that has humidity settings, that's great. If you don't, then having something with a lid on will be good, or you might have to put a tray filled with water underneath the rising pot with something over the top to trap in that humidity. And that enables the expansion of the dough without it solidifying the crust and causing the gases to just pour out without actually expanding the loaf. So having a lid is important. Okay, so we'll take our bread, our dough, pop it in. Okay. And we'll put the lid on, we'll throw in the oven. And I normally like to leave it for half an hour in the oven with the lid on. And then after half an hour, we'll take the lid off, drop the temperature down to 200 degrees Celsius or 392 Fahrenheit, and then cook it for another 15-20 minutes, okay, depending on the color of the crust that you like. So throw it in the oven now for 30 minutes with the lid on. Okay, so we have past the time now. I didn't show the removal of the lid at the 30-minute mark, but it's just removing the lid and dropping the temperature down to 200 degrees Celsius or 382 degrees Fahrenheit. Now we're done. Okay, so we'll just remove it. And it's important that when you take out the bread that you don't actually cut the bread. Even though you have the temptation of wanting to cut into some nice smelling bread, don't. You want it resting for at least an hour so that the crumb has optimum time to fully set and seal. And so just put it on a cooling rack and leave it there for an hour. The product, as you can see, this is where we scored to allow the air to escape. Now I wish I had a bigger pot because it has actually risen to the surface of our pot and it would be a larger and higher rised loaf, but we do what we can with what we've got. So that's it. Thank you.